Welcome, welcome. All right, good. So I want to begin my introductions here as people are coming in to the space, and make sure we have make use of our full time today, because I know our team has a lot of exciting stuff they want to cover with you. So I want to. My name is Roger Horton. I am the Director of Maker Programs for Schools That Can, based in New York City, but working closely with our national team. And we're so excited that you're here for our first ever Schools That Can virtual forum. If you're here as a participant, there's no need for you to share audio and video because you're a viewer, and so as long as you can see and hear what's going on from the screen, you're in exactly the right place. So just send us a note if you're having any trouble hearing or seeing anything, and our tech person will be right with you. Okay. But I'm really excited to have our three speakers on the screen with me, and who are going to be presenting to you Designing for the Future, project-based learning before and after COVID-19. And I want to emphasize that there's going to be time for questions and answers. So throughout the session, from now on, you are welcome to put your questions, your welcome comments, anything into the chat, the session chat on your right. And we have a dedicated chat moderator. Shout out to my colleague Jamel. There he is. Jamel's on there. Talk it up to Jamel. Don't let him get lonely. He'll get lonely back there if he's not here and if he's not getting any chat. And I don't know what he might do then. So let him know you're alive and out there, since we just can't have you all on screen. But please enjoy. Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy the chat party. Let's make this fun. Because education needs to have fun in it. Absolutely, I know we all agree with that. I'm really excited to have three educators from the Global Citizenship Experience Lab School with us today. Global Citizenship Experience is in Chicago and has been doing amazing project-based learning for quite some time. And today they're going to talk to us about sustainability's grand challenges and how they may be introduced to students using design thinking. So they're going to draw on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as big picture standards for global education, and they're going to provide all of you with access to the curriculum for an integrated project-based course called ReDesigning the Future that can be used and adapted by teachers as a model for discussing complex issues in the classroom. Okay. You're going to get an introduction to Redesigning the Future and lessons learned at GCE, which is the short for their longer name. So we're going to provide you all with an opportunity to discuss the challenges. So that's where the chat comes in. So listen up, and I would like to now introduce the three speakers. We're going to be having Stephanie Leite from GCE, then we're going to have Adam Cohen-Leedholm, and then finally Cabell King, the head of school at GCE. So give it up, please. Welcome for Stephanie, Adam, and Cabell. And I'd like to invite Stephanie to start us off and get us going. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Roger, for that introduction, and thank you for using the acronym GCE, because the full name of our school is quite a mouthful: Global Citizenship Experience Lab School, and we are based in Chicago. Just to give you a little bit of context, we're an independent high school that was founded in 2010. So this fall we'll be starting our 10th year as a school. We have 50 students that represent 43 different neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. We offer flexible tuition, and we have a focus on community partnerships to give real-world context to our courses. And that's really going to be the focus of my part of the presentation here, is going a little bit more in depth into what that really means and what our model for learning is. For participants, you probably have figured out at this point that if you double click on one of the screens, it will maximize. So if you want to make the slides bigger and you double click on the slides, then they should get bigger for you. Okay, so I want to start off by taking advantage of the chat box again and posing this question to you all that we think about a lot at GCE. So what are some of the challenges that you know or you believe your students are going to be facing in their lifetimes? And this, I don't want to give much more than that. You can interpret that however you want. But if you're out there, please use the chat box and populate it just with whatever comes to mind. This is just a brainstorm. What are some of the challenges that you know that our students are going to face, either right now or at some point in their lifetimes? Okay, thank you, Beth. Being isolated, of course, that's one that we're all thinking about right now. I'm glad somebody mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, homelessness, low-income situations, climate change impacts, discrimination, unequal access to educational opportunities, abuse, student debt. Yep. Yeah, resulting global migrations, human displacement. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So this is quite a list. Mental health issues, Elon Musk. Good. So this is quite a list for us to think about as educators. And you can go to the next slide, Adam. This is something that we really think about at GCE in terms of how are we preparing students to tackle these challenges. We feel like it's our responsibility and our mission as educators to make sure that students, first of all, are aware of these issues, that they understand what the root causes of the issues are, that they feel equipped to address them in some way, and that they also, throughout their 4 years at GCE, we hope that students are able to kind of find their purpose and their personal mission and role in addressing these issues. You can't, I mean, we just came up with a huge list. So you can't tackle all of them as one individual, but we hope that students find their entry point into making a difference in at least one of these issues. So let's move on to the next slide. What does this look like at GCE? We've been working for about 10 years developing a program to kind of respond to this challenge of how do we prepare students to address these issues. And what we've come up with is we have thematic classes, we have integrated subjects, we use inquiry-based instruction, project-based assessments. We make sure that our students are leaving the classroom and experiencing real-world learning. And we also want to make sure that students are understanding both the local context of what they're learning, but also the global relevance. And so I'll spend a little bit of time going into each of these in a little bit more depth. So we can move on to the next slide. This, I'm hoping that you can see this, the font is a little bit small, but this is our 4-year scope and sequence that all of our students go through at GCE. So at any one time, our students just have 2 core classes. One is humanities-based and one is a STEAM-based subject. They go through trimesters each year. So each of those trimesters has one thematic STEAM course and one thematic humanities course. And I'll show you an example for the freshman STEAM sequence is water, fuel, and food. These course titles look a little bit different from what you see at a lot of high schools, because we want to make sure the purpose is up front for students. So in their study of water, fuel, and food, they're learning algebra, they're learning biology, they're learning earth sciences, which are some of the core subjects that they cover that freshman year. But they're studying those and applying those in the context of global resources and understanding global resources. So this is something that has really helped us in our transition to what we're calling connected online learning these last few months, because students just have two core teachers that they need to communicate with. And so they're able to keep in regular contact with those two core teachers, and they're still learning all their core subjects, but it's much more manageable than if they were to have 7 periods in a day and have to keep up with all that communication. So let's move on to the next slide. That's thematic integrated courses. And our classes are also inquiry and project based. So we try to organize all of our units and all of our lessons as an investigation. And students are invited into that investigation with a guiding question. And after they are introduced to that question, they are provided with a series of essential resources that kind of lay the foundation for how tools that they will need and use in order to investigate that question. So those are, your basic vocabulary, your math formulas, your primary readings for humanities classes. So they use those resources to investigate the question. And then at the end of that unit, they demonstrate and synthesize what they have learned in an action project. And so and then at the end of the term, we do a final presentations event where students show the work that they have done. These are public events where we invite families and partners and anyone who wants to come and see the student work is invited to those final presentations at the end of every term. Our last final presentations, or our most recent ones, were in March, right after we had to close down the school. So these are just some examples from our winter term final presentations, where we asked students to develop their own guiding question and provide evidence for how they had pursued that question throughout the term. These were conducted online. We tried to recreate our school in a virtual format where they were able to interact with each other, present to each other, and we still invited members of the community to join in those presentations and in that conversation. Okay, let's move on. So if we think of the guiding question and the action project kind of as bookends for a unit of learning, what happens in between there? We talked about these building the foundational knowledge that they need to investigate the question, but we also want to make sure that students get out of the classroom and are able to see what they're learning in the classroom come to life. So every Wednesday, oftentimes it's more than every Wednesday, our students go out into the city of Chicago and take advantage of all the experts in the city, all that the city has to offer, so that they can see what they're learning in action, talk to professionals, see how they learn, see how they use those concepts in real life. So in the process, they're learning how to navigate the city of Chicago. We use public transportation to get around the city. They're meeting professionals, they're seeing different work environments, and they're being exposed to careers and pathways that they might not have even known existed. By the time they graduate, depending on how long they have been at GCE, they'll have gone on 100 to 150 of these field experiences before they graduate. So this really allows them to make connections and get the professional experience that they need to use after high school. Okay, let's move on. global relevance. We talked about our name at the beginning of this session, global citizenship experience. And our name is really important to us, global citizenship. That's a term that we hear a lot these days. And I think it was kind of emerging when we started the school 10 years ago. And so when we started thinking about how do we define global citizenship? What does that mean for our programming? What does it mean for our students and our curriculum? And we started thinking about the United Nations and thinking of how the United Nations defines global citizenship. And I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These were established in 2015, and it's a series of 17 goals that really identify global priorities that we as a global community need to be working to solve. So they range from eradicating poverty and hunger to achieving gender equality, improving sanitation and access to clean water, working on climate change, and thinking about our production and consumption patterns. And so these, kind of like the list that we created at the beginning of this session in the chat box, this provides a list of priorities that we can use to really ground our program and allow students to see the greater purpose. We want to make sure that what we're learning is relevant in their neighborhoods, and that they see those connections, but that they also see patterns across neighborhoods throughout the world. So if you're looking at Sustainable Development Goal number 1, no poverty, that's something we can investigate in our neighborhoods, wherever you live, wherever you're listening or participating from today. That's something you can look at in your own neighborhood, but you can also look at that on a global scale. So we're constantly moving between the macro and the micro, and getting students to look at these issues and see the connections and the patterns on small and big scales. So that's everything that I wanted to talk about in terms of just an introduction to our program and what we do at GCE. Adam is going to give you some examples of what all of this actually look like in practice. And then Cabell is going to be talking about how has this model fared in our transition to connected online learning. But let's take just a minute or two if there's any questions at this point. We can take 1 or 2 questions, and then I'll pass it over to Adam.
Everyone, please send us on a question if you have any questions, and we'd love to get that to Stephanie or to any of our speakers, and we'll take care of those, and then keep going with our presentation here. And
we'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. So if there's nothing that jumps out right now, I think Adam, you can go ahead and get started, and then we'll just start to collect the questions.
That sounds great. All right, Adam, it's all yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so what I want to focus on is how we demonstrate mastery through our projects. We get a lot of questions about project-based learning, what that looks like on the day-to-day. So Stephanie gave us an awesome overview, the big picture of how all of our classes are organized. And I'm going to walk us through one example class, which we taught this past winter. It's called ReDesigning the Future. This was a class we piloted in the winter with Greenbacker Capital. They helped us design the curriculum. We used their inspiration, their resources, their feedback. We were focusing on the climate crisis, but trying to think about it from multiple perspectives. Just like all of our classes, we encourage students to build off their passions, direct their own learning, because we're trying to avoid these simple right or wrong answers as we dig deeper. All of our classes, humanities and STEAM, are really focusing on these last 3 bullet points because we feel like it leads to richer investigations and more memorable learning experiences. So one of the main topics that we covered in this class and in many other classes is this idea of design thinking. So as we're trying to struggle with the climate crisis, my first question is, how can we use design thinking? Generally, it gives us perspective. It helps us hone our ideas, refine our concepts so they become as strong as possible. In all of our classes, we ask our students to take risks and be conscious of their process, reflecting on their mistakes, the wrong turns, as innovation is rarely linear. I remember growing up and thinking that any mistake was a waste of time, but trying to come to terms with this idea that actually it's really valuable to try something out, even if it doesn't work, and think about it, to reflect on it. So my hope is that we can take a minute and just think about this. How would design thinking approach the climate crisis? We have these 6 main steps. Number 1 is empathize. That's where you conduct research to develop an understanding of your users. We have to get some perspective. Once you have that, we can define. That's when you combine all your research and observe where the problems exist. From there, we can ideate. We generate a range of creative ideas. We can prototype, where we build real tactile representations for a range of your ideas. We test our ideas so that we can return them to our users for feedback. And then we implement them. We actually put them into effect. So I want to take a moment and think. We can add this to our chat. How could we use this design thinking process to solve or mitigate, work on the climate crisis? If you want to type in any ideas of how we could empathize to get some more perspective, how we could define where we really focus our research, ideate where we brainstorm together, prototype where we try it out, test where we get some feedback, and then implement. What are some thoughts? I can think of lots of ideas that I've seen of really creative concepts. Ask the people at the center, interviews, absolutely. It's not just about us, it's about the people who are dealing with this. Maybe they're in another city, another country. Absolutely. Think about the scale, the big picture, but like Stephanie said, the macro and the micro. Is it happening in your street, in your block? Is it happening in a continent across the world? Absolutely. Mapping. We do, in a design engineering class, we do journey maps. We try to think about how people use these tools, whatever the product is, and what are the strongest points and what are the weakest points that we can work on. Yeah, think about what resources are available. These are great. Inequality in climate is a huge problem. And then, of course, we do have the deniers out there. Part of this class was using design thinking as a tool and trying to consider, what are we able to do? Is it inventing a product or a process? Or is it trying to think about what is currently out there and can we innovate? Can we improve what already exists? And that was a big part of this class, because whether you're talking about climate change or any topic, the design thinking really helps us hone our ideas, refine our concepts. Absolutely. So now that we're warmed up in terms of the design thinking, let's talk more about the class itself and how this is an example of GCE's model. As Stephanie said, we use inquiry-based learning. We use real-world learning. So first things first, we use guiding questions to help focus our investigation. These are meant to be not simple right or wrong answers, but things that start a conversation that we can research, that we can really dig into. So for example, we talk about how we design a sustainable future. What are the grand challenges of sustainability and how can they be addressed? What is the future of our planet? How do empathy and systems thinking influence design? And how do you evaluate a solution? From there, we connect with these real-world partners to think beyond the classroom, to break down those walls. We're looking for experts in the field who could help us gain this hands-on knowledge. So for this class, for example, we talked to the Plant Chicago about circular economies. That's them digging through compost in the top right. We talked to the Friends of the Chicago River about systems thinking and all the different animals in the river and how they interact, all the organisms. We talked to the Hive about the importance of bees and how their disappearance has different consequences. 350.org is a really fascinating organization focusing on climate change and what we can do politically. How do we get the word out? And even the Lincoln Park Zoo, we talked about all the different organisms interacting in that one little lake, for example. So all of these partners were thrilled to talk to our students about what they do, to hear their questions, because we've really encouraged this concept of asking questions, of inquiry, because that's where the most learning happens, is when we challenge these assumptions and we think deeper about these concepts. Some of the big takeaways from the class I want to share are maybe obvious. Climate change is a complex issue. Like most of these problems we're facing in the SDGs, they don't have a simple solution. For example, electric cars alone are not going to fix the climate crisis as much as we'd like to think they would. No matter what we do, there's always going to be some resistance because some people are hesitant to change. And this is going to require a great deal of collaboration and planning. So we can see all the different concepts or categories in this pie chart of where our greenhouse gases are coming from and how this is going to require a lot of work, a lot of working together. And that ties into this idea of systems thinking. This is another concept that we use in this class so that we can see those relationships and the underlying issues early on. We can plan accordingly to take that feedback and try to modify our ideas based off it. It helps us map the various aspects that are linked and often depend on each other. And we can see those domino effects. We can see how one change can actually have a greater impact later on, perhaps positive, perhaps negative. So as I was saying before, these project-based assessments, this is kind of like our so what moment. After these skills and talking to various experts, what can we do with this information? How do we transform our learning into something we're proud of, something we can share with the world? That's not just a test we can put on our refrigerator with a magnet. How do we open it up so students don't feel boxed in like they're being led to a single answer, but rather let their creativity guide them and have multiple opportunities? So what we did in this class is we asked students to think using the design process, using systems thinking, based off of the research and all the people we talked to, what are some ideas, small, to help with the climate crisis? We're not going to solve it just with one concept, but what are some things we could do? What are some positive steps? So these are a couple examples. One of them was designing better transit. So that was a new train line and new transit stations, for example, with solar panels, make them more welcoming. Another idea on the bottom right is more of this vertical gardening in your kitchen, using recycled materials to help us. And then this is one of my favorite projects. This is from a freshman. We called this Graham's Ark because he essentially had an entire city in a boat. And he was thinking about all the different things he could. For example, if you see the chicken coops, you see solar, you see wind power, you see different things for people to stay sane. That was some of the feedback we received. Oh, how are you going to maintain your health, your mental and your physical health? And this is something he went completely on his own. We gave him some feedback, but this was just something he saw in his head and he wanted to design on his own. And that's really the hope with project-based learning, is that a student will find their passion and they will find their answer. I'm not giving them the answer as a teacher. I'm giving them a problem. Their challenge is to solve it in a creative way so that it doesn't feel like they have to do it. This is something he wanted to do. He would work on it after school and after late at night just because he really believed in this idea and it was very apparent. So now Cabell is going to take over, our head of school, as we start thinking about the next steps. I gave you a summary of one class and how we use design thinking and systems thinking to really dig deeper in climate change. And now Cabell is going to think about those next steps.
Thank you, Adam. And it's really fun to watch the chat. And one observation that I'm loving about this chat, I don't know if this is true on everybody else's screen, but every time something new comes up, for whatever reason, the time says in a few seconds. I feel like I'm reading your comments from the future. Nevertheless, I mean, so this is a there's so many good questions going on the right, and we will get to a number of them. Obviously, implementing project-based learning includes a number of details, right? Pragmatics that both make it compelling and sometimes difficult. And we all want to know how other schools do it and do it successfully. I should say at the outset, we are excited to share what it is that we're doing at GCE. At the end of this presentation, we'll give you a link to follow, and in the expo that you can find for us, also in the left-hand column, we're glad to share the curriculum for this particular course that Adam has been talking about with you. Furthermore, if there's a follow-up conversation about pedagogy or other sorts of infrastructural issues, we're glad to have that conversation too. We do want to spend a little time thinking about what we're learning about project-based learning, how we are affirmed in it in this moment, and how we come out of COVID-19. How we might apply some of these same sort of design thinking elements to this current situation. And obviously, sometimes we use these elements in the classroom with students, so that the classroom is a lab, right, where we're doing experimentation. But sometimes the school is its own experiment, right? I mean, the lab is some other kind of world, right? And so we're doing a pedagogical thing and an administrative thing simultaneously, and so there's sort of layers to this philosophy. And one of the phrases we use often at GCE Lab School is model the learning, right? I mean, we say to teachers, you are exemplars of learning, and the institution is an example of a flexible, malleable, developing, evolving space, right? And we think that will serve our students well, that it has served them well in this moment and will moving forward. This is a moment again where we might use the chat box, and we have thought a little bit about problems that we might face in the rising generation. We've thought a little bit about climate change. I want to, if we can, just to take another moment in this chat box and think about some of the issues raised specifically for education, maybe specifically for high school education, by our present circumstance. And there's been a lot of conversation in the plenary address this morning about how we sort of survive this moment. I have a particular question about how we emerge from this moment, right? So whether it is 4 months from now or 24 months from now, what is education, high school education, at GCE and elsewhere on the other side, right? Do we return to business as normal? Or have we learned something enduring about education in this moment? And so, sorry for the long-winded question, but the prompt here is to think a little bit about what do you hope are the lasting lessons, lasting considerations coming out of COVID-19? Thank you, Daniel. Yes. So we need to have open communication with students and their families. Relationships, attuned to social emotional needs when developing curriculum. Move toward mastery grading. Great. Good. So thanks, Adam. We can stick there for a moment while we generate a few questions. Students engaged with curiosity, trauma-informed reintroduction. Yes, thank you. Students must be guided with their interests. Great. Great. Adam, if you can move forward again. So first, like every school, GCE made a quick pivot in early March, in a time of uncertainty. This clip on the right is from a Chillicothe, Ohio Gazette in 1918. As the superintendent made the decision to close schools there, they closed them for about 2 weeks, and then returned to school. The article that this was a part of, or the history that this is a part of, is they were making a decision then about, we're going to miss 2 weeks of school, which became for them 5 weeks of school. There was a question then about how to make up that school. Should they extend the school year? Should they extend the school day? Should they have school on Saturdays? All sorts of questions. They ended up returning as quickly as they could, and then leaving school again. So they left October 2nd, returned November 11th, and then dismissed school again in December because of a surge in cases. We all are in this sort of uncertain space, right? We don't know what school will look like for a time. We don't know when we can return. And so what is the sort of length of this disruption? As so many, right, we should praise our teachers at GCE and elsewhere for their quick pivot. Also, families and students and support staff, right, all of the others that make school work. We think that GCE has been relatively successful in this pivot at continuing still to maintain a meaningful delivery of an educational experience, right? Teachers and students still meet daily in virtual classrooms, as Stephanie expressed earlier. That's facilitated in part because they've only got 2 core classes, right? And so they don't have to meet every class every day. They meet with 2 instructors and 2 cohorts of students daily, and sometimes something else, maybe an art class or a foreign language class or something else, but there's 2 core engagements daily. The quality of work is consistent with previous terms and years. We've been able to continue some of our field experiences, obviously not out in the world, but bringing industry experts and partners into that virtual classroom. And attendance at GCE is high, at about 93% across all engagements. The best thing we have done, I think, is what we call our senior capstones. We gather once a week, and a senior or 2 reflect on the past 4 years. And it has been awesome, right, for them to sort of think together about what high school has meant to them and the person that they are coming as they depart. And it's been a real community building event for us to do that. We have an advantage, of course, in our size, and again, in the interdisciplinary core that reduces the number of classes. Some of these other things that are listed on the slide here, right? Our culture of inquiry, starting with questions, keeps the relevance of learning right at the front, right? It's not about the test. It's not about these standardized tests at the end of the year. It's not even about college admission. It is about asking authentic questions. And I say culture of authenticity there too. Jay McTighe talks about sort of authentic problem solving, right? So in our project-based curriculum, we present students with real world projects and real world problems, and we are solving them together, engaging them together, not always solving them. The work is meaningful and timely. Students have agency. Faculty are free to fumble here, right? Like, and that's been part of the culture even before COVID. It's all right sometimes if a faculty member doesn't know the answer, right? We are modeling the learning and collaborating with students. A culture of trust, right? We walked into this with a culture of trust and care and intimacy. Our faculty fortunately use most of the technological tools that we have been using prior to this event, in this event. One of our school values is to entertain the unfamiliar, and here's an example of that. And we really try to, with our students, recognize the opportunity in this moment. It's traumatic and uncertain and difficult, but there is also opportunity here, right? There's a problem-solving opportunity. And one of the things, we're a place-based experiential school. And one of the things we want to convince our community of is that this is an experience too, right? In fact, an historical one that we are engaging together, though geographically apart. We can all get better at this, right? And GCE certainly can too. One of the things that's clear to me is, we all had to make our moves quickly, and given more time, we will do it. We will do it better. Now let's move on to that next slide, Adam. We do talk about returning to normal, right? God knows we would love to get back into the classroom. We'd love to get back to our field experiences. We'd love to get back to the tactile project making that we do together. We'd like to be able to share the resources of our building and our space. Relationships matter, and so all of these things. We're eager to get back to school. But I'm intrigued by this survey, and it's not the only one I've encountered that's cited on the right. 61% of parents in a recent poll said that schools should focus on rethinking how to educate students and should come up with new teaching methods as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. It's hard to interrogate, right? I mean, I haven't been able to interrogate this particular survey. But we can wonder, right, what parents, what these 61% of parents have in mind when they say, let's rethink education. We also, of course, have surveyed our own parents and their our students about what's happening in this moment. But we wonder, right? I'd love more information about prospective parents, universities, employers. This does seem like an opportunity to think about education again, and there are some lessons that we might come out of it with. We are limited, of course, by our imaginations and the pressures of established systems and our old habits. But I hope that we will seize collectively, not just GCE, that we will collectively seize this opportunity as much as we understand it, and not just sort of grab the easy shifts, right? That we don't go back to business as normal and say, but now we know how to use Jamboard, which is awesome, right? Let's not move back and say, and now we need a new trauma-informed counseling program, which we probably do, but there might be something more substantial, right? More sort of definitional to what high school education is that we can grab onto. And so let's move on to the next slide. Already at GCE in the fall, we were struck by Greta Thunberg and some of her remarks that she had left school, right, to institute her school strikes. Because it seemed like there was something more important than school, right? Sometimes, surely that's true, right? There is something more important than school. But the implicit message there is that school needs to change, right? If there are really important issues that young people need to grapple with, and they are not grappling with them in school, then school needs to shift its attention and its strategy. And so we come to this place again. We were there in the fall thinking, how ought schools to be different? And now we're thinking that again in this COVID-19 space. Next slide, please. So thank you for doing that exercise with us at the beginning of my talking, thinking about the circumstances inspired, the questions inspired by COVID-19. Here are some that I have generated, right? We've learned something about the circumstance in which we learn, right? Inequities have been exposed, and as Diane Levitt was sharing with us this morning, inequities are not a single thing, right? They are technology, and they are language, and they are family support, and they are economic resource. I mean, there are all sorts of kinds of inequities that are being exposed. As somebody mentioned in the chat earlier, students will have a new expectation of our attention to their individual situation, right? Their learning particularities, right? And we have to have attention on student and family trauma, right? These are things that are going to bear with us following this event. I think we come out with some new confidences, right? Some new confidence in teachers' skill and patience and creativity, in technological tools and the ability to incorporate them, in the possibility of asynchronous instruction and individual pacing. The number of times I've encountered in writing, sort of surprisingly in the last 2 months, the notion that now we should focus on learning more than compliance, as though that weren't the case before, but it certainly is the case now. That I think there's a tension on learning rather than following the rules or fitting into the boxes. We've got some new anxieties, right? I think about the relevance of education. We got some new safety concerns, right? Maybe the school intruder concerns bear with us, but now health is a safety concern, right? Air quality is a safety concern. And I think there is a new ambition to significance, and that there's a new challenge to higher education. I think it was raised again in a plenary address this morning, about the value of that education and our expectations of higher education, right? Will high school, will college be the logical and presumed next step following high school, following this event? I'm not certain. I read somewhere recently that as many as 30% of next year's students are seeking deferrals. And so that's a thing. Next slide, please. And so what does that mean for us? Right, so if that slide before was the empathizing, right, and the defining, what are the new circumstances? We begin to ideate, imagine, and then prototype new ways of schooling. Right at the front, right at the front of this, it is a reaffirmed interest in project-based learning. At GCE, we are convinced, right, that this is an appropriate response, right, to a number of these questions about relevance, about student passion, about attention to personalized and individualized learning opportunities, right, that projects make that space. They are simultaneously sort of complex, right? They challenge the heuristic boundaries of academic disciplines, as they reaffirm the importance of expertise gained within those disciplines. At the same time, they can be clearly designed to respond to specific learning goals, right? And so one can enter a project as they are, right? We can all ask substantial questions and demonstrate a response. And some of those are quite advanced responses, and some might be less advanced responses, but they are appropriate demonstrations of our understanding and competencies and skills, which means that one can adapt the education for particular students in a group context. They are sincere and authentic opportunities for student choice and expression. And they insist on student integrity because in most cases, they are specific to our engagement in the classroom, and they're multivalent, right? And so it's much harder to sort of cheat on them, right? One has to enter, and then one hopes, of course, that if that constructed properly, they solicit higher order thinking. And so again, project-based learning, I think, I hope, right, that other schools with us embrace PBL coming out of COVID. There are other things across the institution that we will begin to ideate and then prototype, working in new ways with industry partners, exploring blended learning, introducing self-based and self-initiated engagements, and as somebody mentioned in our chat earlier, competency-based assessment. I think all of these deserve our attention coming out, and all of them marry quite well with project-based learning. So these are all sort of prospective and under construction, right? The school, again, is a project at the same time as the assignments are projects. That's a space that at GCE we're pretty comfortable and excited to occupy. We've got some great progress there, and we'd love to share the resources that we've developed with any who are excited with us. We've got, I think, about 10 minutes left in this hour, and so I'd love to open it up and bring Adam and Stephanie back for any kind of question. We'll do our best to answer what we can, and to make ourselves available offline as appropriate.
Thank you so much, Cabell, and to Stephanie and Adam. Really appreciate that. Very thought-provoking. And thank you to all of you viewers and participants in this session, 44 of you at the moment. Thank you for your questions. And there's been a bunch. So we're going to try to get right now to as many of those as we can. Let me kick it off with a couple questions about how do you, so here's a kind of a big picture question. How do you balance structure and flexibility in your project-based learning? And related, do your students typically all work on a cohesive project together or in groups, or do they follow individual project paths?
I can talk about that, or at least get the conversation started. So all of our projects have a rubric. So there is a series of competencies we are asking students to demonstrate in each of those projects. So those are shared. That rubric looks similar among all students, but we also like to leave some element open to interpretation, or for the student to choose kind of their own entry point and to take a topic that they are passionate about and use that to complete the project. So that's very intentional in the design. We want to make sure that students are able to take each project and come at it in a way that they feel is useful for pursuing their own interests. We do mostly individual projects, just because group work is group work. It's difficult to evaluate. It's difficult for students, depending on what the group dynamics are. We do some partner work and some partner projects, and then of course throughout the courses leading up to the action project, we do a lot of group discussions, group projects. But in terms of the final evaluations and the projects that they do, generally it's an individual rubric. And Adam, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there.
No, I think you nailed it. Most projects are individual, but even those will definitely have some group collaboration. It could be a feedback session. It could be a peer review. It could be just everybody give me one question you're struggling with and let's answer it together. When we do have, let's say, a partner project, we need a lot of communication about, are you splitting up the activities so that one of you focuses on this half and that half? We do a lot of reflection after the fact. Did you feel like you communicated with your partner effectively? What would you do differently next time? Because it is very difficult, but it's also important, especially as a designer, but in so many fields. We need the collaboration, the brainstorming. You can't just do the whole project by yourself in your room. We need to kind of share some of our ideas, and that will hopefully lead to better ideas. And it often works out really well. When it doesn't, we have to figure out why and what we can do better next time.
Great. Thanks, Adam. I have two questions here that are also related. I think you might be able to answer them at once. And you touched on rubrics just now, which is great. The question from Mary Beth was, how do you evaluate student progress mastery for a variety of different types of projects? And then somewhat related is, what does this end up looking like on student transcripts? Are your course offerings readable to those that are reviewing college applications?
So I might just say a word about presently GCE issues, as most schools do, numerical grades. We are a member of the Mastery Transcript Consortium and are engineering, or at least prototyping, a shift to mastery-based or competency-based assessment. And we're really excited about the work that's coming out of the Mastery Transcript Consortium. One uses the rubrics, right, on each of these action projects and in the class to determine the numerical grade at this point. And each of those is fashioned with particular learning goals in mind. And so that, I mean, that's at least the thing to say about the rubrics at this point. The transcript itself that we currently produce does require some translation, right? So if we've got it at the front, one takes a humanities course that is global context, and it is 3 courses divided into SDGs and you and who am I, right? We presently translate that into Carnegie unit credits of the social sciences and literacy, or English credit. It's a little bit uncomfortable to do that, right? Not because we know that we are teaching those skills, and we have aligned the curriculum against a number of standards, including Common Core and C3 and Next Gen Science standards and whatever else. But it is a kind of suggests a kind of separability of disciplines that we're not actually entirely confident with, right? And I would rather be talking about particular student competencies than about those disciplinary credits on our transcript. I think that shift is coming.
Thanks, Kabul. I'm going to try to invite Shelley onto the screen. She was asking to come on the screen, and I think Shelley might have a question. So Shelley, if you're coming on and have a question, we'd love to have that. So in the meantime, while she's coming on, there was a question about how is admission to the school determined? So maybe you want to answer that?
So like most independent schools, we have an admissions office. Students go through a process that is about fit, right? We have a largely self-selecting applicant pool, those who are interested in this model of education, and their families pick it for themselves. We are excited about ambitious, curious students. They are not always the highest performers at their previous schools. In most cases, they are students who have been, for some reason or another, dissatisfied with education in other models, and they're looking for something different.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks, Kabul. I guess my very final question as we wrap up would be, Are students at GC part of how the school might be redefined as a result of COVID? Are their voices part of the redesign process?
I see some nods from Adam and Stephanie.
Anyone want to take that last question?
Absolutely.
I'm sure we all have ways we would answer that, but just one thing to say that is part of our regular culture is student surveys. So that's something that we have been doing at the end of every term since we started. We have a series of questions. Sometimes it's the same question at the end of every term. Sometimes it's specific to whatever the content was that term or something that happened that was unique, and we ask for student feedback. We do focus groups about the coursework and about the program. So that is something that is kind of already embedded in our culture. Our students are very vocal about their opinions and what's working for them and what's not. So that's another thing that I think works to our advantage as we make this transition. So the short answer is yes, and that's something that is really important to our program already, and it will continue to be important moving forward. And I don't know if Cabell or Adam have anything else to add.
I mean, I might just say it's related, but not directly. We are building a new campus at this point. We've been working with various student groups over the last 2 years to identify priorities in that project, which is to say that students are a part of imagining the future of this school at just about every level, and invited into that conversation, sometimes as conversation, sometimes in survey, sometimes in school project, right? So one of the projects in their policy class is to review the student handbook and elements of that handbook, right? I mean, we're consistently inviting them to think about their own education and the environment in which it happens.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you all of you for your thoughtful presentation and your responses, and thanks for just your work at GC. It sounds like a very dynamic environment for students, faculty, and families.